Hello and welcome everyone to another seminar on search. Vaiva, take it away. You have 50 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for your time that you have allocated to listen to me. And today I'm going to present you my preliminary work. This is a very preliminary thing. I have a working paper that still needs a lot of improvement. Therefore, any comment, any suggestion, maybe even an offer of co-authorship is welcome. Good. So let's speak about what I have written and what I'm going to talk about today. So, sorry, sharing. Oh, okay. So today I'm going to speak about service markets, about personalized service markets where service providers face production cost differentiation. All right. I will explain things in a minute. Just be patient. So if you look at nowadays world, and of course the things that happened also between 2019, some services happened to move online to the online world very easily. Let's say if we speak about financial services, you see neobanks, insurance companies providing services online without any physical offices. IT services, like if you want to order somebody to build a website for you or to improve it, you don't need to go to any physical office to meet a developer. They do it just online, contacting you online, and you explain all the details, and they give their price codes and things move on. But some services, for some reason, have difficulties to move to that online world. For example, if we speak about home repair, these services I faced the last year a lot because I moved to a new place and I had to do some work with my apartment. If we speak about nannies, for instance, you want to hire a babysitter for your child. It's not easy to do it online. In some places you can do it, but most of the time you still have to make additional contacts with agencies, with people to talk to them, to discuss things with them. Cleaning services, you also cannot order them simply on a platform unless they're really very standardized services. Most of the time you see very many companies, they just they ask like, what kind of office or house or apartment we have to clean. Is it after party or is it after a simple working week? Or how many people live there? If there are any pets and so on and so forth, they still need some kind of extra information. They don't sign those online contracts and platforms easily. And there can be many reasons why these things don't go to the online world. I mean, starting from personal preferences, unpredictability of customers, very many things can explain, very many reasons you can find that explain why some services stay away from from online markets. I suggest one of the reasons. I think this is a correct reason, but it's not the only reason, of course, because I don't study those markets like in very, very tiny detail. So one of the reasons I propose why these services don't move to the online world is the shortage of information about production costs, right? Because you don't know exactly what your customer wants. You can't determine production costs, service supply costs clearly. And because of this uncertainty of this information shortage, you don't agree to sign online contracts. You want to meet with a client to discuss the job and then afterwards to give your price quote. Additionally, when we move to the online world, people often provide information about the services they want, right? If I want to change a light bulb, or maybe if I want to paint my room, or I want to hire a babysitter for a child for 5 hours, to clean my clothes, to buy some dry cleaning service, and so on and so forth. So people provide some information, for example, whether they have pets at home, or whether the apartment is after some fire that really requires a lot of repairing work, and so on and so forth. But people choose how much information to provide. And in this kind of game between service buyers and suppliers, and an internet platform in between, people may strategically withhold some information. They do not submit all the information, and therefore service suppliers cannot determine their production service provision costs with certainty. They are afraid to give price quotes because there is a big risk to run into losses, and therefore they avoid internet contracting. This is one of the reasons why some services don't move online. And this is the paper is about. And what is also important about these markets is that people withhold information about costs, but actually it's not because they know that the costs are high and therefore they just keep details to themselves to avoid high prices. In these markets, people actually don't know how much it costs. You see, you can find a lot of anecdotal evidences in forums where I quoted a few of them in the introduction of the paper, where handyman, they just simply say, okay, we drive 20 miles to the customer who thinks that only a light bulb has to be replaced. We arrive and we see that the whole electric installation is broken, because the person doesn't understand what's going on, but they have signed a contract on TaskRabbit and they expect the light bulb to work. And the payment is very low, and then there are conflicts going on. So people really don't know what's going on. And just to show things, how things go, I made a few print screens from some Lithuanian Facebook groups where people share their experience and their questions about home repair. And for example, there was one post of a guy named Jaunus. He said, okay, I want to renovate my bathroom, but I have no idea how much it costs, right? So he just simply said, okay, I know what things have to be done. And just please give me, from your experience, from your judgment, how much it costs, because I have no idea. And then you see then a lot of comments and discussion going on. Somebody did it for 1,000 euros because he or she did it himself or herself. Somebody hired a very expensive company and it costs 5,000 euros. And then there's discussion whether it's worth removing tiles or not removing tiles, what is more expensive, what is less expensive. Just people, in this way, they accumulate information. But I mean, here a person has no idea how much it costs to do the repair work. I want to buy some service, but I have no idea how big budget I have to have. Here, for example, there's another example. You don't see the numbers. Here, a woman received a quote from a house repairing agency. It just simply listed the works from painting to cleaning, putting tiles, changing pipes, and just they simply listed the work they plan to do for 70 square meters apartment. And in different columns, they said, they looked at the square footage, at the number of items to be replaced. They wrote price quotes per item. They calculated taxes and discounts, and they gave some price estimate. And then this woman says, okay, I've received a price quote with all the details. Is it like reasonable? Is it too much or is it too little? What is a reasonable price for such for such work? And then like, she posted this table, she put her question, and there, of course, there were some answers and some responses to her question. And I think people more or less agreed that it was kind of a reasonable price. So what I want to say that sometimes people want to buy service, they have no idea how much it costs. And they go, probably there is some internet platform existing there, like handyman.com or TaskRabbit.com, and there have been very many platforms. They actually appear and disappear from time to time because it seems that the business is not very sustainable, and probably because of the lack of participants or some other reasons. And people just post the work they want to buy. They ask for price quotes, but sometimes service suppliers, they can't submit price quotes. They just, because they have no idea what actually the problem is, because there is too little information provided about service objects. And instead of giving price quotes, sometimes they contact you and said, maybe let's meet and maybe let's talk and let's see what the situation is about. So this is what the paper is going to be about. Of course, I will do a lot of simplifications. I will dismiss a lot of details from those markets that we actually look at. I wanted to highlight the strategic information exchange in the model. So therefore, I try to strip as many details as possible off. I will explain in a minute. So because let me run through the main blocks of the literature that my paper is related to. Naturally, we are in this consumer search seminar, so I can't miss the literature about the consumer search. So I have a big block of literature on search. The most related ones are those with sequential search for prices. So my workhorse is Stahl's model with some modifications. We have here online, offline world price quotes submitted in different manner. So I naturally run into search cost and price advertising. The paper is very kind of similar, but not exactly the same. I mean, it borrows something from Roberts and Stahl's paper of 1993. You see there are some similarities. Because we're speaking here about cost uncertainty, naturally I relate to the literature on cost uncertainty. However, this cost uncertainty plays a role a little bit different from the cited papers, where people are not afraid. In those papers, consumers simply don't know the cost of the firms, and therefore they can't infer properly about price distributions, and it has implications on search incentives and natural equilibrium. Here we have search and cost uncertainty from the side of service providers, more producers. But things will become clear in a minute. You will see we have some issues with relation with privacy protection, especially with Johnson's paper with targeted advertising and advertising avoidance. Why? Because here we have kind of information supply from consumer side, but they don't, which kind of is similar to the cases of learning about the willingness to pay of consumers, but these consumers strategically withhold some information. This is something similar to those papers on privacy protection. However, there is one small difference. I don't have these kind of nuisance and other costs that people experience because their privacy is violated. Here, information withholding happens just from strategic reasons to get lower prices. It has nothing to do with some extra costs. Well, at the end of writing the paper, I figured out that it had a lot to do about Bayesian persuasion, especially when I faced with multiplicity of equilibria. Now I understand why I faced a lot of multiplicities. You will see where these things enter after I explain the details of the model. And also there is some literature, especially dealing with healthcare services. These incentives of to lie of experts, because in my markets, in my study markets, in my market model, consumers, they actually don't know their costs, the cost of service provisions. So service provider could always tell that it's very costly to me, right? So there are some incentives for service providers to mislead consumers. However, it doesn't happen in this model because of competition and some distribution assumptions about the costs. There are no incentives, but I can draw a parallel between my paper and that strand of the literature. If I have forgotten any important group of the literature, or you want me to recommend some papers, because I mean, paper writing is still in progress. I have the first draft, but it has to be improved a lot. So any suggestion would be welcome. Anyway, any suggestion would be welcome.
Sorry, Vaiva, can I make a suggestion?
Yes?
Some of the things that you describe very much sound like credence goods. So as if, the consumer doesn't know, but if you had the expert actually visiting the consumer, he could easily tell what the cost is. But, he has obviously his own incentives. And I mean, I guess that the entire literature should be related, at least. I'm not sure. It's like, I guess once we get to the model, we know more, but
thank you, Eva. Oh, that's a very nice suggestion. So these incentives to lie of expert is actually related to the credence good literature. I did not dive too much into it, but I have to look at it. Thanks for reminding me, and I have to check more, because sometimes you search with the wrong keywords too, and for some papers, and you skip them. I will have a look. Thanks. Good. So let's move on to the setting. I have a similar to Stahl setting. So it will not be something that you are not unfamiliar with, and probably you all of you practically know what the setting is. So just let me go through the details and through some changes point by point.
Vaiva,
yeah.
Just sort of I mean, your motivation is kind of going to drive a lot of the choices. So to the extent you could make that motivation more solid, that would be helpful. I mean, it seems like your motivation is anecdote, which is fine as applied theory, but like you say, there are things like TaskRabbit. There are all sorts of things out there. So if you could kind of be more systematic in telling me what services you think are amenable to online and which ones are not, that would be helpful.
Good. So some services that are can be standardized and which costs can be predicted easily, like for example financial services, or some very standardized services of like repairing or sewing or cleaning or whatever. So those services, they go online very easily. But so for some services that can have the variation of service provision costs, and these costs have difficulties to be predicted. I mean, service providers have issues in predicting those costs. Such services, most of the time, they don't move to the online world. And with this model, I'm trying to, I'm aiming to show that
I understand that, but you're making this claim as if it's a fact that I should know.
Okay, so I have to work better a little bit on the example.
I'd be a little bit more comfortable if that was substantiated. Okay. So I don't know. I mean, let's take things that are very similar sounding services, but like restaurants and catering, right? Okay, they're doing basically the same thing. A restaurant is not so customized. Catering is much more customized, but they're basically doing the same job. So is it the case that it's hard to find catering online? I don't know. I've never looked, but my prior would be that if I searched, I would find lists of catering with reviews.
Yes. So what I mean here is it's not only finding a caterer who, your point is very valid. What you say, like, okay, restaurant services are very standardized. Therefore, you can simply buy dinner or like before COVID pandemics, you could buy dinner or lunch online.
Now everyone in North America is on Uber, so
your meal. Well, so but you see, when it comes to catering, it's less frequent when you can sign a contract without meeting a caterer. What a caterer wants, he wants to meet a client and to discuss the details of the menu, of number of people, where to deliver food, what would be the environment where food has to be brought, whether it has to be heated up, and things also like that. So for such services, of course, you can find the caterers online with their reviews, but you can't sign contracts with them online without meeting. And why these contracts aren't being signed? I say, okay, there is a shortage of information for the caterer to give you a price quote.
That's fine, but I mean, online is certainly helping me find a caterer.
Yes, but
relative
you still
to what it was,
agree.
and the caterer that I trust relative to what used to be the case because of the reviews.
That's
now, if you're
true.
telling me,
but you still don't get a price quote online. What I take
sure,
here,
that's fine.
I take here the markets where you, for example, can sign a contract, a service contract online without meeting a person in person. I simply, for example, if you take a TaskRabbit, right? You want to buy to hire a handyman, I don't know, just to put a few nails into a wall, and then you can sign a contract there. You make the payment, and then afterwards the handyman arrives and does his or her job. But you put the signature and the payment beforehand, before that person comes.
So is the point here just that if stuff is massively customized and personalized, then we can't write contracts on ex ante? That's exactly that's what you're saying?
Exactly. And it's not only because of customization, it's because there is a shortage of information. People strategically don't supply enough information for these customized services in order to avoid high prices. And this impedes moving these services to online contracting.
Okay, but to be clear, so and I'll stop in the second.
Okay.
So impedes online service contracting means it isn't the same thing as saying online is not helpful. It's just saying that we're not going to write these ex-ante contracts.
I'm here going for signing contracts and paying in advance prepayment.
Okay.
Good. So now let's move to the model.
Can I ask a follow-up though? Oh,
okay.
Just on the markets idea, like should we be thinking of car repair where you could go to several places in quick succession to get price quotes as different than like home repair where you have to schedule appointments and there's an inherent kind of slowness to it?
With car repair, you also, for some services, you can do it like to sign contracts online before going with your car. You can get price quotes for some standardized work.
I'm more thinking the non-standardized work. So
for non-standardized, you have to go.
So that's almost like the perfect example then, where some of these
could be, because as a person, but here what I want to see that like even with a car repair, of course, as a consumer, I don't understand many things, but I could provide information, right? How much broken my car is, right? Is it only a tire, or I got into some car accident where half of the car is broken? So I could provide this information online to car repairing services, and I would get some price quotes, but I don't provide this information because I want to avoid possibly high prices. So I will explain them. It could be an example. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah,
I will think about it as well. Okay, let me go to the model. I promised Dan to finish before time.
Well, sorry for jumping in. I just one other thing which came to mind because you asked for papers.
Okay.
It kind of also addresses a couple of things in your. So there is this. I'm sure you know this paper by Garrett, Gomez, and Maestri. When there is
no, I don't know that one.
Well, essentially there is a competition over menus. Yes, and in a sense you have informed party, which would be a consumer who knows the type. But that's the difference with yours. And then essentially it's a variant model of competition over menus. I think the difference with your paper is that in that case there is vertical differentiation. Consumer surely knows their type. But I guess with your problem with the light bulb, for example, of course, kind of changing the whole electrics in the house would help with the light bulb as well. So you can think that as vertically differentiated products still. But yeah, so in your case, consumer doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, consumer doesn't have like full information about how much it will cost.
Good. That's great. Thank you for the suggestion. Could you please write the name of the reference to the paper in the chat?
I will write it in the chat box now.
Because I will forget. I'm not making notes right now, and Dan promised me to send the chat log, so I will have all the notes there. Please write them. Good. So let me now get back to the model. if there are no more comments and questions. So in the market, on the demand side, we have a huge mass of consumers with identical willingness to pay. That is new, that is greater than 0, and sufficiently high. We will forget about this parameter very quickly. Consumers need personalized services. So what I assume here, that as soon as a person receives service, he or she gets that new. So because also, like, if a firm cannot supply the services, it's like a 0-1 decision. Then the firm does not supply that service. So therefore, consumers, all service offers from different firms, they see them as homogeneous goods, because in the end, I have my light bulb changed. I abstain from any vertical differentiation. That's what Alexei was referring to. Let's assume, like, for example, when you look at these job platforms like TaskRabbit, they impose kind of guarantees to customers that the job is done properly. Otherwise, people can ask for refunds. I'm not, of course, modeling that process. So here I make an assumption, like, if a firm does the job, it does up to the needs of the customer. So therefore, we don't have any quality differentiation. We don't have, like, for example, a repairman comes and says, okay, instead of putting 2 layers of paint, I will put only 1 layer of paint, and therefore I charge you a lower price. These things are ruled out. We have just a job, and the job is done, period. I mean, vertical differentiation and all these menus would be some kind of extra work an additional thing to the model. It could be postponed for future research. So people have different tastes, they have different needs, therefore cost of service to each person is different. On the supply side of service, I have two firms. They have different equipment, different employees, they have different labor skills, experience, and so on and so forth. Therefore, I assume that these production costs, the service provision costs, are consumer and firm specific. So, these costs are distributed according to a two-point distribution, either zero or some positive value C overline. And how I also look at in the extensions of the model, what happens if these costs are perfectly correlated positively and negatively. So I also look at the correlation in the extension, but for the basic model, I look at the IID distributed production cost, and I justify it with the fact that, for example, some firms can hire people who are very good painters and some like very good car mechanics, and the other firm has a person who is extremely good at painting cars with specific equipment, and the experience of employees differs, time differs, types of used the mechanisms and tools, they also differ. Therefore, for the same service, different firms can have different costs. I mean, these things can happen because there's of different human and physical capital firms possess. So production costs are distributed according to a two-point distribution. I did not take any continuous distribution, that would be hell to solve the model. I already have issues with two-point distribution. These high costs happen with probability higher than 1/2. I don't know what's going on if the probability is lower than 1/2. All my numerical simulations are for the cases that are higher than 1/2, and I already have issues to solve. So therefore, I maintain this assumption. So as I have told from when I was talking about examples that probably were not very perfect, costs, these service provision costs are fully observed after a meeting. After a service provider, after a firm, the representative of a firm and the consumer meet, they look at the service object, let's call like that, and then these costs are determined. Then the firm realizes, then that firm realizes whether it costs zero or overline C to supply service. And these costs are observed privately by that pair, consumer and the firm. Another firm has no idea what's going on there. This meeting costs as for consumer, these search costs that you are familiar with. These costs happen from the first search. This assumption is different from the assumptions in Stahl model, where you have a first search for free. I abstain here from the cost that the firm experiences. This is kind of more like market entry costs, and this would only just encourage firms to move to the online world more. I just keep that cost kind of normalized to zero. Let's call the consumer has higher cost than the firm. And as well in the market.
So can I ask, related to this, because you abstract away from this cost, does it matter that one of these production costs is zero? Could it also be positive? Could you have C lower bar and C upper bar instead of zero and C upper bar?
I don't think it would have issues.
Okay, because
it's just a normalization for me.
Yeah, because in all the examples, still it really does, it is costly
here
for the firm to
it's a normalization.
Okay.
I haven't seen anywhere any big difference when I simulated, when I wrote the equations, because it's standard Stiles model, so whether the costs are higher or lower, it's not a big deal. It could be like more probably if I had differentiation of C lower bar for different firms, then there would be kind of market entry issue. But from these things, I just stay away. I make firms symmetric to make things simple as possible. So here the costs are just the normalization to zero and C overline, and in this way I highlight that there can be high costs and low costs of service provision.
Vaiva,
the rest of the model is the same as in Stahl, so we have these lambda shoppers and one minus lambda searchers, and I see that Hesky has a question.
Yeah, so this S is a meeting offline, right?
Yes.
So just kind of going to the motivation, what does being fully online mean in this model? Like, you kind of want to kind of okay.
Good. I'm moving now to the next slide. Good. So because the description of the setting is not finished yet. So there is an option. So before, in the previous slide, I spoke about the standard kind of offline setting where people had to search for prices. Just the interpretation of that search was a little bit different. Now, there is an option to sign those service contracts online, to pay for them and to wait until the service arrives to you. Here there's one important detail to note. There will be no updates on prices exposed. For example, if one service company gives me a very low price quote, I say, I'm taking your service, I pay for that service, and afterwards the serviceman or service lady arrives at my house and said, no, for that service you have to pay more. These things don't happen. I cut this option off. There is no price update offline. Exposed after everything is realized. So if I buy service, if I sign a service contract online, I agree on some price, the service has to be delivered to me at that price. There is no renegotiation going on afterwards. So there is no kind of catching customers with low prices and afterwards charging them extra. Because I also here keep away from all these vertical differentiation issues, quality differences. I just remove those options away from the model because I want to make it simpler.
Vaiva, can I ask you, why is that? Why do you do that? I'm asking as a victim of ex-post prices. We renovated an apartment relatively recently, and all I got was ex-post prices.
That's
I wish I paid one price that I negotiated.
I had the same thing when I had to renovate my home. With this paper, I want to point kind of a reader and everyone to the case that people strategically undersupply information, and in this way they block online markets for some services. And naturally, if I had to make a realistic model of all of kind of a particular market, for example, repair work, I should include this exposed renegotiation and these exposed prices. But then there would be an additional detail to consider. The model is already complicated and it would bury the main idea that I want to show you. Because in these markets, very many things happen. That's what I say. There could be very many reasons why some services don't go for online contracts. This, for example, is exposed pricing, exposed price renegotiation. It could be also one of the reasons. Maybe, for example, some firms, in some sectors, it is applied very much, and therefore people, they just simply don't trust online intermediaries. This also could be a reason why some services don't move to the online world. I am focusing on one reason, which is that people don't supply enough information in online platforms, which leads to cost uncertainty, and therefore firms refuse to sign online contracts. And in order to highlight this detail, to highlight this issue, I try to simplify model as simple as possible, and I remove all other details that could have effect on equilibrium. This is why I abstain from this, because I want to make things as pure as possible, just to keep on that element.
But would you get some kind of diamond paradox on the search cost, because I pay the search cost and then I'm held up by the provider on the search cost? Is that?
Here it doesn't happen because I have a style setting with shoppers and searchers. Just let me go
Okay, sure.
further, okay? So if the contract is signed online, so afterwards there will be no price renegotiation, just the service has to be supplied because the price was paid. I abstain from any effect of platform. So here platform is just some kind of a public good provider who doesn't charge anybody anything. I say, okay, there is this environment where you can sign contracts. I don't dive into optimal pricing of platforms, fees, and other things that could affect equilibrium. It's just a place to sign a contract. So platform is not playing any role in the market except facilitating transactions and information exchange. So when a consumer wants to buy service, and put some information in a platform on the internet, and I said, okay, I want, for example, my house to be painted. So I could post as a consumer like pictures of the house, how it looks like, to put a description when the house was painted the last time. Maybe there was a special paint used that I want that paint to be used again. Maybe there are preferences on some color. Maybe working hours of a painter are important to me. So I, as a person, without knowing how much things cost, I just can simply put some details about the service object and my preferences, right? If I put it online. And after this, because these details usually are not full, consumer does not put all the information. So this information that service providers obtain generates imperfect signals about possible service provision costs, about possible production costs. And this signal is just, I model it like a truth or noise signal. So with probability beta, that is the value between 0 and 1, the service provider can predict the cost accurately, so sees the actual value of the cost. And with probability 1 minus beta, it's just some random variable that is distributed in the same way as the costs are. Just a standard thing that is used to model signals in a specific way. So if people shop on internet, when they go for price quotes, they are all shoppers. No, there are no costs for consumers in order to contact sellers. So only offline meetings, only offline contracts, only offline calls, emails, I don't know, meetings at the object, they cost to a consumer search cost as. I will soon show you the sequence, how things move on. Probably things will become easier because here I have just the bullet points. And a firm can make offer on, so what happens that after consumer supplies information, a firm sees the signal about the cost, and as a firm I can choose whether I want to give a price quote online and await until the consumer signs a contract with me, and just the payment is processed, and afterwards I, as a firm, as a service provider, I go and provide service. Or I just said, okay, I put like a message to the consumer, please call us. Let's speak about what you want, maybe like for 10 minutes, or maybe let's meet at the service object. Just let's have a chat. So there are two options for a firm. I know that I have presented very many bullet points. Let me go now to the scheme. I hope it makes things clear because there are very many details in the model. So in the kind of first stage, a consumer posts information online, right? Goes to some particular platform, says, I want this job to be done. These are the details. So a consumer picks how much information to post, how many details to list in that platform, in this online environment. So in this way, a consumer picks beta, the precision of the signal. Then a firm observes that beta, makes cost estimate, and then makes a decision whether to give a price quote online and then go with and then sign a contract, accept the payment and supply the service, or just let's chat about it. Do you have when is the convenient time for you when I call, and so on and so forth. And then the consumer sees the responses of firms, like how many quotes he or she has received, or maybe there are very many invitations just to make offline meetings. And then the consumer makes a decision whether to pick the best online offer, if there is any, whether to search for prices offline to arrange those costly meetings, or maybe just, of course, there's always a third option, just to quit the market. But this is not an option. I mean, I restrict parameters in a way that everyone tries to get at least one price quote.
Vaiva, may I ask two questions,
yes.
Very brief. The first question, what would correspond in real life to this fact that the firm observes beta? And second, whether considering just this beta style mechanism is without loss of generality here in the setting.
So just simply as a person, when I have a service object that I want to buy, for which I want to buy service, I post some details. How this object looks like.
I mean, I say I need to change
and what
the
service
light
is necessary. So in this way, I regulate by the amount of information that I supply. I determine beta. So, and the firm sees that, okay, this is this much information supplied about the service object, and I can predict my service provision costs with this probability.
So in the context of your light bulb example, what would that be?
Okay, with light bulb, it might be a little bit difficult, or just simply a consumer wouldn't supply information that last week there was a fire because he or she used an iron in the house.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Just a consumer would hold information. She says, okay, I have a light bulb to be replaced because I don't have light in my house. But
then the firm would require you to post also information whether you did not have a fire because of the iron.
So then you could say, yes, there would be some additional element, maybe a platform, for example, what platforms try to do, because they try to attract consumers and service providers especially. So they put a lot of restrictions on what information has to be supplied and how it has to be supplied, whether photos have to be uploaded. There are questionnaires, as you say, like about fires and other details. These are kind of additional strategic moves of platforms. Here, I just simply say, no, we don't have this option. Just people voluntarily choose how much information they want to supply. Additionally, service objects are very specific. They are customer specific. They are very different. And even if I have a platform where I facilitate transactions between service providers and buyers, where I allow them to chat, to share information, I can't foresee all the details that might be necessary.
Sorry to interrupt. Just so you know, you have 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Whether it's a general mechanism or in the setting or not.
I don't think it's general.
It's not general. Okay.
Okay.
No, it's not general in general, but I thought in this setting it might be.
Good. We can discuss things further later because I really have only 10 minutes. I hope I will give just a notion of what's going on. So the purpose of the paper is to determine this optimal beta and to show that this beta is less than 1. So what I do, I will just so there are incentives that I've told. These searchers want to avoid search costs, and therefore they are encouraged to supply information online, to go for online contracts, to get price quotes online, because they want to avoid costly meetings. But if full information if information quality increases online, then we have consumers who are kind of captive, because we have IID distributed service provision costs. Some consumers have 0 service provision cost at one firm and very high provision cost fee overline in another firm, and these people are captive. So this 0 cost having firm can exploit this fact. It can isolate those customers better, and therefore it results in higher prices on average. And this fact discourages people to supply information online. If we look at the supply side, firms want to capture more customers. This encourages them to make offers online because they just can simply capture more searchers. But they also face production cost uncertainty because people don't supply enough information online, and therefore they move to offline world. Sorry. So that like every market party faces 2 opposite incentives when it comes to online and offline meetings, and this interplay between these incentives determines market equilibrium. Good. So what I do in a benchmark case, I put the parameter restrictions such that if beta is 0, so if no information is provided online, both firms go only for costly meetings. So search costs are very low. There are parameter restrictions listed in the paper. So in the benchmark case, if no information is provided online, if beta equals 0, we have a standard Stiles model with cost differentiation. So therefore search rules look a little bit different. I have 2 integrals to be added instead of having only 1, because I have 2 different costs of production, which are unknown to consumer before search. I do some bookkeeping, which is a little bit more complicated than for Stiles model, but not too much complicated. It's still solvable. I derive price distributions. They can be it can cover 1 interval, they can be piecewise functions. It depends also on the parameters. and I solve that model. This is the benchmark case. And then I see, okay, can I find some beta value, some information quality that could break this benchmark, that would make firms to move to online offers? All right. And okay, so I will, there is one small sneak peek, is that if we take the standard Stiles model, even with that cost differentiation, the expected price for people who get, for whom production costs are 0 is decreasing in search costs. And this already signals that the situation where information is fully provided online is much better for all consumers than the benchmark case. So the benchmark case is always broken. The question is whether that beta is 1 in equilibrium or something less. So I identify in the paper some threshold value of beta, a threshold value of beta that I denote by beta minimum. So with this threshold, if the information is of better quality than this beta minimum, if the signal precision is higher than this beta minimum, some contracts are being signed online. If beta is less than this beta minimum, or both firms stay in the offline world. So simply this beta minimum and higher betas, they encourage deviations from the benchmark setting, and firms get incentives to offer prices online to consumers about whose costs they get low signals. They want to give online offers to consumers who are likely to have low costs instead of high costs. So what I do further, I try to solve for pricing equilibrium for any beta higher than this beta minimum. So when I already consider these online and offline offers, I have mixed strategies there. I have 4 price distributions. So one is for price distribution for offline meetings for consumers for whom costs appear to be equal to 0. So this is denoted by F0. For consumers for whom service provision costs happen to be C overline after the meeting offline, it has a different subscript next to F. And there are also 2 price distributions for online prices. So for that, because these different offers are given to consumers with signals about high cost and low cost, because we have some beta higher than the beta minimum. So I already have 4 price distribution. On the top of that, I have mixing between giving online contracts and offline contracts. So I have like a 2-dimensional mixed strategy equilibrium that really is a very handful to solve. And there is multiplicity of equilibria. Support of these 4 distributions can overlay. So the setting of Stahl, where they had a unique probability for every price to be advertised, is not very handy. I really tried it, but it didn't give me any mileage. And actually, I made mistakes when solving the model for some cases. This reformulation of the model gave me opportunity to see more details and made things, at least I can explain things easier with that. I have multiplicity of symmetric equilibrium for some parameters, and I even failed to identify the equilibrium for some parameters, because these functions, they can overlay, they can be piecewise, they can be in different intervals with gaps. I mean, if I wanted to identify for all the possible parameters, these distributions, I would need a lifetime to do it. So what I did, I focused on the cases where beta is very close to 1. And this is the symmetric equilibrium that, for example, you see here, is when beta is really actually very close to 1. I really had to go to the numbers, the 3rd digit after comma, because for some cases, I really had to take very narrow intervals to be close to 1, but not to have 1. So this symmetric equilibrium exists for all parameter values, for values of beta equal to 1. And this is a unique equilibrium for that range when beta values are equal to 1. I put things in the supplementary appendix, how things have to be solved. So in order to solve for this equilibrium, I have 4 equations to solve for distributions. I have the 5th equation to solve for this alpha parameter for the probabilities of jumping between online and offline world. And on top of that, I have a nonlinear search rule equation. So getting explicit solutions presenting them here nicely is a nightmare. So how does this equilibrium look like? So here you see this F0. These are the prices charged to people who search offline, and they realize that the costs are equal to 0. They get prices from this interval. Prices online to people who have signals about low costs, kind of have low signals about the cost, are drawn from the higher interval. Then there is the next interval of prices that is offered online to people whose signals about costs are high. And of course, because firms also go with positive probabilities to offline offers to people who have signals about their costs high, we have the fourth distribution. And you see that two distributions are even higher than the highest production cost, because we have the reservation price higher than the production cost. Why? Because here we have, if a consumer, I don't get a signal, if I don't get an online offer, I update my beliefs. That's where Bayesian persuasion kicks in. I have to update my beliefs about possibly low service provision costs. Therefore, I know that it's very likely that my C is equals C overline, so I'm very unwilling to search. So as if my reservation price is C plus search cost. Therefore, we have a reservation price higher than the cost, and firms make use of it. When beta becomes equal to 0, all firms move to the online world. The upper bound of two price distribution moves to C. So these two price distributions become degenerate. They get only 1 point. And the upper bound of G0 of this price distribution to people with low signals increases. So you see distributions move back and forth. Their limits, some of the limits increase, some of the limits decrease. Therefore, when I have to look at how the expected expenditures of people change when beta increases or decreases, this is necessary to determine the equilibrium value of beta. I really have a hard time and I need help there. So what I have managed to do, when I look at the equilibrium, when I characterize the equilibrium, I was wondering how the expected expenditures of people changed, of consumers changed when I varied beta in this very narrow interval close to 1. So when it comes to equilibrium value of beta, what I see that shoppers always copy searchers. Why? Because if a firm can identify a shopper from a searcher, so prices for a shopper are drawn from the setting as if beta equals 1.
Sorry to interrupt. You have about a minute to wrap up.
Okay. So I will just skip that part, and I will show you just simply the graphs. And here I will stop. I will skip parts of welfare, and for other details, I invite you to look at the paper. So what I find that here I look at the expected price, expected expenditures of searchers. So this is expected price to be paid plus search cost if there are offline meetings. And if we have very high share of searchers, of people who have 0 search cost, so we see that the expected expenditures are decreasing in beta. So this is the value of the expected expenditures when beta equals 1. So in this setting, it's very likely that consumers go to full information case, and the online market happens. But if we have very few searchers, we have shoppers, we have very many searchers, we have the opposite thing. We have there are these 4 forces that have competitive and anti-competitive effects. I list them clearly in the paper. You can look there. So we have this effect of not catching captive consumers strongly enough when we have very few shoppers. And therefore, the expected price with less precise information is lower than that when the information is fully supplied. I really thought I would manage to go through all 22 slides in 1 hour, but I see I haven't. Well, I was not fast enough in answering your questions. So I just simply invite you to look at the paper if you want to know more details, or we can arrange a personal chat at some point in time. Thank you very much for your information and for your time spent. And just let me wish you a nice evening.
Thank you for a great presentation. I mean, we'll now open it up to questions. So there will be more.
The questions are always good. They always say that there is a lot of work to be done.
So Vaiva, I mean, for some of these applications, and maybe this is where the beta min kicks in. Like the reason I'm getting a plumber is because I don't even know how to describe what the problem is. Like I know my toilet, you know, is flooding, but if I knew what to do, I wouldn't call the plumber. So is that how you want me to think about beta min?
Yes. So beta min is then say you would say, okay, I need a plumber because my toilet is broken. I'm being flooded in my house, but you can supply some information, for example, because I threw into the toilet some plastic bags.
Sometimes I can, sometimes I have no idea what's going on.
Exactly. But so here I'm speaking about information when you know.
Okay.
You can supply information, but you don't supply.
I understand,
Enough.
but I mean, mixed in with those people are going to be some people who just don't know what the relevant information to provide is.
That's true. That's true. So that would be an additional element in the model. But it also would determine beta. They would say, okay, people just simply can't go beyond that particular level.
That's what I'm saying. So is that how I want to think about beta min? Because you know, I mean,
beta
like
min is the minimum information that is necessary to trigger online settings, online contracts.
Right, but the kind of feasible beta that I can, whatever the feasible informativeness is, you know, I can think about that as just some people have no idea how to describe the issue.
That's true. That's another problem. Here, in the model, I see that people can describe the issue, but they choose not to.
I understand, but I mean, is that just a simple resolution of why these things are hard to contract on ex ante online? It's just people just don't know what to say.
That's true. That's also true.
World is kind of complex enough that
yes, they just simply don't reach beta minimum with their descriptions because they don't supply enough information. That's true. But in the paper, I go beyond it, and I show that even then, even if people can provide information, they don't.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, I understand that. But if I'm trying to think about why these things are hard to contract on ex ante, then it might be enough just to say people don't know what to say.
That's also another explanation. Yes. When you look at the real market at a real particular market with all the details, you can find many elements that they miss. As Sandra mentioned, this afterwards renegotiation, as you say, people don't know what to post. Lots of things could be included.
And just on the sort of use of the style models. So shoppers, I always have a difficult time thinking about, but you know, I mean, the story I tell when I teach my students is that my uncle's retired and he likes to go and find out that, you know, shopping is a pleasure for him. You know, he gets kind of consumption utility from walking around and learning the price of tomatoes. So here I want to think about shoppers as people who like talking to plumbers.
You could simply, okay, if we speak about, I don't know, pre or post-COVID situation, like if I'm working at home, it's not very difficult for me to wait for a plumber and to meet him and to show what's going on with my toilet.
So you're saying the search cost is lower. That's a different thing from saying the search cost is zero.
You can say it's lower, but then you would have just simply assume particular parameters in order for market not to fail. It's also simple like normalization. You would have people with low costs and high costs. So in order not to have these corner solutions and the failure of the market or diamond paradox, you would need to assume some parameter restrictions. And this,
I mean, I'm comfortable with it. I actually, for plumbers, I'm fine with the diamond paradox. I think it's not so far off.
So it depends on the person. But like, for example, if you are in the office and in order to have a meeting with a plumber in the house, you just need to put more effort to drive home from the office.
But that's heterogeneous search costs. Like
exactly.
to get us away from some of these corner solutions, we actually need these search costs to be zero or negative, and that's a very different statement.
Yes, these costs are can never be negative. We don't have, people don't generate this extra utility from shopping like your
Well, my uncle does. I mean, that's
yes. Here I don't have that element in the utility function.
well, I mean, for the whatever that would mean I just visit everyone. That he would look like a shopper. That's not a big deal.
Well, you have to model, if you do an empirical job, you have to put extra parameter into his utility function.
No, not really. He just visits everybody. You know, and his baseline is it's what his zero baseline is. I mean, he is a shopper in your model. That's fine, and I can understand what that means. But when we're talking about meeting plumbers, it's a lot harder for me to believe that there's people who get
well, if you are lonely at
positive
home,
utility from. Yeah, I think there's easier ways to deal with it. That's fine. It's just an observation.
And if a plumber is good looking, there could be some utility.
But actually pushing on that though, is there really evidence?
TMI Vaiva.
Is there really evidence though of shoppers in any market? Somebody who searches everything, like in a practical sense?
My uncle with the price of tomatoes.
My father does the same. We had to repair stairs of the summer house. So some new tiles on the stairs had to be placed. So I think he invited like 6 or 7 specialists in the area just to get price quotes. Because he has nothing to do at home. No, he's retired. I mean, that's his example.
So going back actually to the earlier question then about like car repair, just because I'm thinking of it as some of these are posted and some of these aren't. And so it provides kind of a nice way of thinking about this. Going back to the most informativeness I could provide in some sense. If we're less worried about why you're strategically hiding information and more just worried about when there's no way of even providing it, is that's simpler in this model, right? You could easily characterize that result.
Yes.
It's kind of not really the main point, but just as the kind of first level of which you're prevented from.
That's true. That's true.
Right, because platforms in many ways are very good at fixing problems that exist in markets for very many years, and the platform finds a way around it to some extent.
That's true.
But if the problem is just unable to be fixed, yeah. Are there any more questions before I cut the recording?